Hello, this is the Mushroom Wizard, and I'm returning again with another presentation regarding the mushrooms found in Saskatchewan and the ways in which we go about identifying and picking those mushrooms. So at this point, we have more or less just agaric mushrooms to look at as we become more advanced in the types of mushrooms that we are talking about. So these mushrooms will be tied together in ways other than the manner in which they produce spores, as you have already seen happening with the oddball section. Today we're going to be looking at agaric mushrooms that occur primarily during the springtime, or first occur during the springtime, but are often overlooked in favor of morels, false morels, and some of the polypores. So, let's begin here. This is the spring mushrooms of Saskatchewan. The genre that we will be looking at are Agaric, Gymnopus, Melanoleuca, and Sathyrella. And what you can expect from this presentation is basically a look at some of the agaric mushrooms that are edible and occur primarily in early spring. If you recall from the terminology presentation, agaric simply means something with a stipe, a cap, and gills as a form of producing spores. And these, like I've mentioned, are often overlooked by mushroom pickers. And one of the reasons is they tend to have some lookalikes, or just not be as favorable or enjoyable as morels, which are what people tend to target. The first mushroom we're going to look at is the spring field cap. And this is actually a group of mushrooms. So this is the Agaric praecox complex, as it's commonly called, or the Agaric praecox group, whatever you choose to call it. So the cap ranges in color from off-white to tan to yellowish brown, and it is darkest in the center. This is a convex cap, flattening with age. Sometimes develops a shallow umbo and becomes ambinate. And you can see that happening in the photo here. That's a good example of an ambinate mushroom. The cuticle is smooth when young, but as it grows and expands and dries a bit, it cracks. It becomes areolate. And when I say areolate, you can see that happening there. It's like mud that's been left out in the sun to dry and has cracked as a result. The margin is smooth, often becoming appendiculate to begin with, and then kind of becoming smooth later on. When I say appendiculate, again, if you refer back to other presentations or the terminology presentation, you'll remember that appendiculate is where you have fragments that have been left over and are hanging down from the cap margin. And these are left over from the partial veil, which would have covered the gills when they were young. So these grow up to about 4 inches in diameter. So a medium-sized mushroom. Here's a size reference for you. Here are the gills. So these are off-white, becoming brown with age. They are close together. They're adnexed. If you recall, adnexed is where those gills approach the stipe and then they dip downwards before touching the stipe. You can see that very clearly in this photo. There are frequent short gills. You can see some of these gills have 3 or 4 short gills between them. And this is covered with a partial veil when it's young, and it also produces a dark brown spore print. We can see that spore print here, so you have something for future reference if you're using spore prints to help you ID. The stipe is off-white, becoming brownish with age. It is tough and fibrous. It is cylindrical to clavate. So if you recall, cylindrical just means equal width throughout, and clavate is kind of like a club where it's much thinner at the apex, and then it increases in width as it approaches the base. and then it's stalk-like. That means that you can kind of twist it around a bit, often around your finger, just kind of like what you would expect from a dandelion or something with a more fibrous stalk when you're thinking of plants as well. And then this grows up to about 4 inches high. There is a ring, so the annulus is white initially, and it turns brown as it matures because it has that spore deposit that's building up on it. And it's flaring dependent, so if the annulus is big enough, it will have enough weight to kind of droop downwards. Otherwise, it'll just flare outwards like you're seeing here. So, just to mention again, this group refers to at least 4 macroscopically identical species, all of which are likely to be occurring here in Saskatchewan. This is a saprobic species. It is terrestrial and found in grassy as well as wooded and urban areas. So it is quite, it has quite a range in Saskatchewan during the spring. I tend to find these in areas where grasslands are meeting woodlands. And they're found spring to early summer. You can expect them around end of May and into June. And they're quite gregarious. You can see in this photo here, there's quite a bunch of them lumped up on top of each other. In terms of edibility, they are edible, but they are poor. They have a bitter aftertaste. As I put there, why bother? It's probably why they're overlooked. But it's a good one to know, regardless. Just for the sake of knowing. Perhaps you can pick them and find a way that these can be eaten where they're absolutely delicious. Probably not, but who knows? Those are good for advanced mushroom pickers. I didn't really include any lookalikes because probably shouldn't be any occurring at that time. The next is the Russet Tough-Shank. This is the Gymnopus dryophyllus group. So, the cap again, it has variable colors, which range from cream to tan to yellowish brown to reddish brown to dark brown. The central area is often darker. You can see that happening a little bit there, and then the margin is pale, both of which you can see happening in this photo. It is convex or campanulate when young. If you recall, campanulate is the shape of those old-fashioned bells that you would see in bell towers. And then these quickly flatten out, and you see that that's happened here with these ones. The cuticle, and that would just be the surface of the cap there, the outer layer is smooth with a kind of waxy feel. The margin is smooth, so with nothing there, basically just a normal margin, or it can become kind of wavy. And sometimes it becomes ragged or split with age. So it's a very thin-fleshed mushroom, and that's often what happens with thin-fleshed mushrooms. They're quite fragile that way. And these grow up to about 2 inches in diameter. You can see some younger ones here. You can see how they're all crammed together at the base as well. The gills are beige, and they darken with age. They are adnexed. So again, they're dipping down towards the stipe. They are crowded together. Short gills are frequently found between the regular gills. And there is a white spore print. The stipe is cream, becoming darker towards the base. And then they become a bit darker brown with age. They are cylindrical to clavate. You can see the ones here are fairly clavate, even bulbous. Again, stalk-like, there should be some... they shouldn't just snap when you touch them, right? You should be able to bend them around. Many stipes may fuse together at the base in kind of a clump, like you're seeing happen there. So this refers to several macroscopically identical species. They are saprobic. They are found under hardwoods, particularly oak, poplar, and birch. They are terrestrial and often found upon the leaf litter of these trees. That's what they're feeding upon. They clump together in large groups, and they are found primarily in spring, but continuing on a lesser extent until fall. I will also state that I have often found these upon extremely decayed wood that has fallen to the ground, just hunks of wood that is just almost to the point where you can touch the wood and it's starting to crumble. So you can find it upon that as well. Edibility, once again, they're relatively poor, but they're not poor in a bitter way. They taste like whatever you cook them in. So don't expect much from these in terms of what they will be adding to your meal. But often you can find these in such huge amounts in the spring that picking a few of these may alleviate the sense of disappointment from having found no morels. So they have quite a bit of variability in terms of their odor. I find in the spring when you're picking these, they tend to smell like just mushrooms. They have an okay, pleasant smell to them. Later on in the summer, they tend to smell more and more like dead fish, which really kind of repels one from picking them. And that may also be due to it being a different species at that time of year or whatever it may be. They are good for dehydrating. They get kind of crispy like little chips. And these are for advanced mushroom pickers. So here are some of the lookalikes that you need to watch out for with this one. It bears a fairly close resemblance to Hyphiloma fascicular, which is the sulfur tuft. And this is a cool weather species to some extent, so you will find it in the early spring as well. And it grows from wood, the same kind of hardwood that you would find the Russet Tough-Shanks from. But the sulfur tufts tend to have greenish gills. Here we have some older Gymnopus dryophyllus. You see the stipes have aged quite a bit, and they are fairly close to the Gallerina Marginata on the right, and that is the funeral bell, which does kill people. So again, that's another mushroom that you would need to be very familiar with before you started trying to pick these. The next species we're going to look at is a common one in the spring and often in the summer and fall as well, but since it occurs so early, I'm going to feature it here. That is the pale Brittle-Stem. That is Sathyrella Candeliana. So the cap is whitish with yellow in the central area. You can see it there. It becomes tan to dark brown to dark gray with age. It is convex or campanulate when young, usually flattening with age, but sometimes becoming umbinate, umbilicate, or uplifted. So when I say what those three there that I'm talking about, uplifted is where the margins kind of go upwards and it forms a cup, whereas umbilicate is where it forms that cup, but it still has that umbo, that bump in the middle. And then umbinate is where it's just flat and has that umbo. It has a smooth surface, like a smooth cuticle when you run your finger across it, but it becomes kind of wrinkled with age. The flesh is fairly fragile. This is a hygrophonous species. It becomes two-toned as it dries out. We've seen that once or twice already. The margin is smooth or appendiculate, as you can see in this photo, where it has those veil fragments hanging down. And it becomes striate and splits with age. And this grows up to about 4 inches in diameter, though it's almost always smaller than that. Pale Brittle-Stem, there's your size reference. Now, on the left, what you can see is that hygrophonous quality that I was speaking about. It is two-toned. That cap, you can see the center still has its original kind of coloration to it, whereas it's beginning to either dry out or become more wet from the margin inwards. And as a result, it has two separate tonal qualities to it. On the right-hand side, we see that splitting. The gills are off-white and they turn gray, and then a darkish brown or a blackish color with age. They are very crowded together. They are, once again, adnexed, so curling down towards the stipe as they reach it. There are frequent short gills between those gills, and you can see if you look there that the short gills are actually of 4 or 5 different lengths. There's a fragile partial veil when young, and you can see how appendiculate that margin is as a result. And this has a dark violet-brown spore print. And there it is for you. It's kind of an off color there. It's very interesting. The stipe is off-white to cylindrical. Oh, sorry, off-white in color. I would say that that isn't just cylindrical, that that's approaching bulbous. It is hollow and fragile. Many bases often fuse together into a clump, and it's actually quite high. They'll grow up to about 5 inches high. This is a Supremic mushroom. So sometimes you'll see it growing as if it's terrestrial. It looks like it's growing from the earth, and you'll see them commonly on lawns. But what it's actually growing from is buried hardwood, or else the roots of a dead tree. Other times you'll see it growing on the edges of stumps, or on the top of stumps, or on the side of stumps. I often see them growing on stumps in people's yards in the fall. Or sorry, not in the fall, in the springtime. Sometimes they will occur late fall, but mostly in the springtime you'll see them on people's lawns if they have stumps sitting on their lawns. And they'll be in large clumps. Their edibility, I'm going to put poor because of how insubstantial and thin fleshed they are, but I actually like them. They do have a mild mushroomy taste. Their short life isn't very long. They decay very quickly. And I would say these are good for intermediate mushroom pickers. Once again, this can be confused for the Sulfur Tuft, which also grows from wood, as well as certain inocybe species. If you recall from the toxic toadstool presentation, inocybe species, some of them do have an appearance that could resemble this, and they do occur as well in the spring, and those are the fiber cap species. And then here we have Gallerina Marginata, again the funeral bell, not a mushroom that you want to encounter. On the left-hand side, if you do look at that picture, however, you will see, I mentioned before that these can be kind of wrinkled in their appearance, and you can see them wrinkled there. Finally, we're going to be looking at 3 of the Melanoleuca species that occurs here, and these are called the Cavaliers. So, on the left we have the spring Cavalier. That's Melanoleuca cognata. In the middle, we have the common Cavalier, Melanoleuca melaleuca. And on the right, we have the white Cavalier, which is Melanoleuca alboflavida. So this mushroom is not often picked. We likely have more species than that, but the features of these 3 species should cover any other species that also occur. So cream with yellowish undertones is what you should expect in Melanoleuca alboflavidia. Brown becoming lighter in coloration with age. Term and salmon at maturity is what you would expect in Melanoleuca cognata. And then dark brown becoming lighter with age in Melanoleuca melaleuca. These are campanulate when they are young. So if you recall, that's kind of what you expect from like a bell-shaped mushroom. And then it becomes umbinate or umbilicate or deeply depressed in cup shape with age. The cuticle is smooth, sometimes with a waxy feel to it. The margin is smooth or wavy, and these grow up to about 5 inches in diameter, so a larger to medium-sized mushroom. And there you can see the other ones. The first one we were looking at there was Alba flavida. On the left, we see Melaleuca cognata with that tan or salmon kind of coloration coming in. And then on the right, we see Melaleuca melaleuca, the common Cavalier, with its darker coloration. Went backwards there. I'll just keep going forwards. So here we have some size references for you. And let's look at these gills. So the gills are off-white to gray, becoming tan in Melaleuca melaleuca and Melaleuca albiflavidia. Or they become salmon in Melaleuca cognata. On the right-hand side, we're seeing the spring Cavalier, which is Melaleuca cognata. They are adnexed or sinuate. As you can see there, it's dipping down and actually coming up a little bit, so it's forming sort of a channel around the stipe. The gills are crowded together. There are frequently short gills, and this produces a white spore print. All of them. And here on the left, you see Melaleuca albiflavidia with its kind of whiter color. On the right, we see Melaleuca melaleuca, where it's turning darker towards a gray coloration. Here is a spore print for you. Now let's talk about the stipe here. The stipe is salmon or tan with mottling. And you can see that happening here. And that's something that you're going to, that's a telling feature often of this mushroom. And it's over top of a cream base. So you have cream with the salmon coloration kind of mottling into it. It becomes lighter towards the apex, as you see happening there. It has a central attachment to the cap. It is tough and fibrous. So you can see longitudinally, it does look like there's a whole lot of fibers kind of almost pressed together, and that's what's making the stipe up. And these grow up to about 5 inches high and about a ½ inch wide. So a very tall, thin stipe. These are saprobic, they are terrestrial, and they are found in woodlands of all types as well as grasslands. Once again, I find these in grasslands that are near the woodlands. That is where they'll be the most common. These are preferential to areas with coniferous forest duff present. So these are not the most well-known species in terms of what actually occurs here. So likely, like I mentioned at the beginning, we're looking at a whole range of species. They're quite good to eat. I have eaten 2 of those 3. I've eaten the common Cavalier and the spring Cavalier. The common Cavalier is quite good. I would even put that as highly rated as a button mushroom, if not more so. The spring Cavalier, however, is one that when you cook it up and fry it, it actually tastes like you're eating mushrooms out of a can. So if you like that, it'll be good. If that's not your favorite, it won't be. They do go well for dehydrating. Their taste remains after you reconstitute them. And these are for advanced mushroom pickers. So here's one that you could potentially mistake it for, and that's Antaloma sinewatum, the livid pink gill. So be careful on that. You can see the livid pink gill in a presentation called Malicious Mushrooms of Saskatchewan, or you can look it up on your own. Here, Melaleuca albiflavidia can also be mistaken for Inocybe geophylla, which would be occurring in the spring. And that is a very toxic mushroom. Melaleuca melaleuca could be confused for several of the Inocybe species, though it tends to be quite larger. Again, Melaleuca cognata could be confused with some of the Inocybe species, which should also mention to occur in the spring. I think we missed one there. Nope, that's it. So, here are some other spring species that are more commonly picked. That's the Morcella or Morels species, the Gyromitra species, the Verpa species. Those Gyromitra and Verpa species would be found in the false Morels of Saskatchewan presentation. And then many of the polypores first occur during spring, and that is when they are often the most edible because they're still kind of tender. So that is the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the Mushroom Wizard, and I hope you remain safe during your mushroom pickings, and I will see you next time. Thank you.